He sold everything to buy a house for his mother, but what he finds hidden changes everything. Marcus Johnson was trembling as he signed the final papers at the realty office. At 28, he had just sold his only car, the motorcycle he used for work, and even his most expensive cell phone to manage the down payment on a simple house on the outskirts of Springfield, in the state of Illinois. The decision had been made the previous week, when he came home and found his mother, Rebecca, 45 years old, dividing a plate of rice and beans between his two younger siblings, 10-year-old Daniel and 8-year-old Emily. She herself wasn't eating anything, saying she wasn't hungry, but Marcus knew that was a lie. In that moment, he promised himself he would get the family out of that miserable situation once and for all. "Mom, you can start packing our things," said Marcus, entering the small room that served as a bedroom for all of them. "Starting next week, we're going to have our own house." Rebecca looked up from the patch she was sewing onto one of Emily's old shirts with an expression of disbelief mixed with worry. "Marcus, my son, what are you talking about? What house?" "I bought a house for us, Mom. It's simple, but it's ours. It has 2 bedrooms, a small living room, and a backyard where the kids can play." The woman set the sewing aside and approached her son, noticing something different in his expression. Marcus had always been determined, but this time there was an intensity in his eyes she had never seen before. "With what money, Marcus? We can barely pay the rent for this place. I sold everything I had of value. The car, the motorcycle, my good phone. I saved up enough for the down payment. I'll pay the rest by working as a construction worker and doing odd jobs on weekends." Rebecca sat down heavily on the bed she shared with her daughter. Through all those years of hardship, she had always avoided talking about the past, always said that the present was what mattered, and that together they could overcome anything. But now, seeing the desperate determination of her eldest son, she felt a tightness in her chest. "Son, you didn't have to do this. We'll manage here just fine." "No, Mom. Enough. Daniel is starting to be ashamed to bring his friends here. Emily asked the other day why we don't have a house like other families. I promised Dad before he left that I would take care of you all, and that's what I'm going to do." Marcus avoided talking about his father, who had left when Emily was just 2. Rebecca never properly explained what happened, only said that he had gone away and wouldn't be coming back. The children barely remembered him, but Marcus held on to a few fragmented memories and, most importantly, the promise he had made to protect the family. The following week, when the moving truck stopped in front of the simple house on Blossom Street, Marcus felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. The property truly was modest: exposed brick walls, a small, poorly kept front garden, and paint faded by time. But it was theirs. "It's pretty, Marcus," exclaimed Emily, running to the backyard. Daniel was more reserved in his approval, but Marcus noticed the relief on his face upon realizing he would finally have a room of his own. Rebecca remained silent, observing every detail of the house with an expression Marcus couldn't decipher. "You don't like it, Mom?" "It's not that, son. It's just that this house feels familiar somehow." Marcus found the comment odd, since they had come from another town, but he attributed it to the emotion of the moment. During the first few days, the family busied themselves arranging the few pieces of furniture they owned and trying to make the home more cozy. It was on the 3rd day, while cleaning the small attic above the children's room, that Marcus made the discovery that would change everything. Pushing aside some loose floorboards, he found a rusty metal box hidden between the wooden beams. His hands trembled as he opened the lid. Inside were photographs yellowed with time, old documents, and some simple jewelry wrapped in a faded velvet cloth. The first photograph he picked up made his heart stop for a moment. It was his mother, Rebecca, but much younger, perhaps in her early 20s. She was smiling, wearing a beautiful floral dress, standing next to a tall man in a suit whom Marcus did not recognize. Behind them was the very house they now lived in, but completely renovated and well kept. With trembling hands, Marcus continued examining the other photos. There were several of them on the same property, some showing Rebecca pregnant, others with a baby in her arms that was clearly him. In the documents, he found certificates and papers indicating that the house had belonged to the Johnson family decades ago. "Marcus, what have you been doing up there for so long?" shouted Rebecca from downstairs. He quickly went down, hiding the box behind his back. He needed to process this discovery before confronting his mother. All her life she had said they came from a simple family, that they had always struggled to survive. But the photographs showed a completely different reality. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Marcus could barely sleep. He kept the box hidden under his bed, but the images kept running through his mind. Why had his mother never mentioned they had lived in that house before? Who was the man in the photographs? And more importantly, why did they leave that place if they were apparently prosperous? The next day, Marcus waited for the children to leave for school and approached his mother, who was washing dishes in the small kitchen. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something important." Rebecca noticed her son's serious tone and dried her hands on the simple apron she wore. "What is it, Marcus? You've been acting strange since yesterday." He placed the box on the kitchen table. Rebecca's reaction was immediate. She paled, and her hands began to tremble visibly. "Where did you find this?" "In the attic." "Mum, what does all this mean? Why did you never tell me we lived in this house before?" Rebecca sat down heavily on a plastic chair, covering her face with her hands. For long minutes, she remained silent while Marcus waited for an explanation. "I hoped I would never have to talk about this," she finally said, her voice choked. "But you need to talk, Mom. I have a right to know. Did I sell everything I had to buy a house that was actually already ours? It's not that simple, Marcus. This house is part of a time in my life I tried to forget." Rebecca stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where a small, makeshift vegetable garden had grown. "I was married to that man in the photographs. His name was Richard Thompson, a prosperous merchant in the area. You were tiny, less than 2 years old." Marcus felt as if the ground had opened beneath his feet. "My father? But you always said my father was John Johnson, who left when I was a child." "John is your biological father, Marcus, but Richard was the one who raised you as his son during your first years. He loved me very much and loved you as if you were his own blood." The confusion in Marcus's mind was total. "Then why did we leave? Why have we lived in poverty all these years if we had a good life?" Rebecca returned to the table and picked up one of the photographs with trembling hands. "Because I discovered things about Richard that I couldn't accept. He was involved in businesses that harmed people in our community. He lent money with predatory interest rates, seized families' properties when they couldn't pay. I saw entire families being evicted because of him." "And so you decided to run away?" "It wasn't easy, Marcus. I loved him, but I couldn't stand by someone who caused so much suffering to others. One night while you were sleeping, I packed some clothes and we left, never to return." Marcus felt a mix of anger and confusion. "But why didn't you tell me this before? Why did you make up a story about my father leaving?" "Because I wanted to protect you, Marcus. Richard tried to find us for years. I changed my name. We moved cities several times. When I finally managed to settle down with a new identity, I decided it was better for you to grow up without knowing this part of our history." "And him? What happened to Richard?" Rebecca sighed deeply. "I don't know. I lost contact with everything and everyone from our previous life. For all I know, he might not even be alive anymore." Marcus looked at the photographs again. There was one in particular that caught his attention, himself as a baby, smiling in Richard's arms, who was looking at him with evident paternal affection. "Mum, are you sure he was that bad? In these photos he seems genuinely happy with our family." "Appearances can be deceiving, Marcus. I saw things you were too young to understand." During the following days, Marcus wrestled internally with the revelations. On one hand, he understood his mother's position in wanting to protect the family from a man she considered dangerous. On the other, he felt deceived for having lived based on an incomplete version of the truth. The situation became even more complicated when, the following week, a well-dressed man knocked on the door of the house. He was a gentleman of about 60, with neatly combed grey hair and expensive clothes. "Good afternoon. I'm looking for Mrs. Rebecca Johnson, or rather, Rebecca Thompson." Marcus, who had answered the door, felt a chill down his spine. "Who's asking?" My name is Dr. Gregory Patterson, attorney at law. I represent the interests of Mr. Richard Thompson. Before Marcus could respond, Rebecca appeared in the living room, having recognized the voice from the entrance. Her reaction was one of visible panic. Marcus, come inside now. Calm down, Mrs. Rebecca. I'm just here to talk. My client would like to resolve some old matters in a friendly manner. We have nothing to resolve. Please leave my property. The lawyer smiled in a not-so-friendly way. Actually, that is precisely one of the matters we need to discuss. The property where you are living has some documentary irregularities that my client would like to clarify. Marcus felt the tension increase drastically. What kind of irregularities? Marcus, don't talk to him, said Rebecca, but the lawyer continued. You see, when you left so many years ago, you left several legal matters unresolved. Mr. Richard never officially finalized the division of assets, and technically this property is still part of the marital estate. That's impossible, said Marcus. I bought this house legally. I have all the documents. Ah, yes, the transaction documents. Interesting how you ended up choosing exactly this property, isn't it? Almost as if it were fate. Rebecca realized they were being manipulated in some way. What does Richard want exactly? My client would simply like a conversation. He has a proposal he believes is advantageous for everyone involved, especially considering you have children to raise and, well, limited resources. The lawyer left a card on the table. He will be waiting at the office tomorrow at 2 in the afternoon. It would be prudent for you to show up. After the man left, Rebecca collapsed into a chair, visibly trembling. Mom, we'll solve this. I won't let anyone take us away from here. You don't understand, Marcus. Richard has always been very influential in the region. If he wants to harm us, he has the means to do it. But if he wanted to harm us, why did he wait all these years? And why only show up after we bought the house? Rebecca looked at her son with a growing expression of suspicion. Marcus, are you sure you chose this house by chance? Of course I did. I saw the ad in the paper. The price was within what I could afford. Which realty company handled the sale? Marcus went to get the transaction papers. When he read the company name, Rebecca's suspicions were confirmed. Thompson and Associates Realty. Marcus, that's one of Richard's companies. We didn't choose this house. We were steered to it. The revelation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. You're saying he planned all this? I don't know what he's planning, but he obviously knew where we were and brought us back here for some reason. Marcus felt a mix of anger and betrayal. He had sacrificed everything, sold his only valuables, only to discover he was being manipulated by a man he barely knew. Tomorrow I'm going with you to that meeting. I want to look that man in the eye and know exactly what he wants. Marcus, it could be dangerous. Mom, enough. I'm tired of running from situations I don't fully understand. We're adults now. We've been through too much. It's time to face this head-on. That night, Marcus could barely sleep again. His mind was buzzing with questions and possible scenarios. Who really was Richard Thompson? Why had he waited so many years to look for them? And what was his true intention in bringing them back to that house? The next morning, Marcus decided to do something he had never planned. He left early, before the children woke up, and went to the historic center of Springfield to look for people who might have known Richard in the old days. At the municipal market, he found Mr. Jack, a 70-year-old man who had been selling fruit at the same stall for decades. Mr. Jack, do you know a man named Richard Thompson? The man stopped arranging the oranges and looked intently at Marcus. Know him? I know him. Why are you asking, son? It's complicated to explain. Let's just say our family has a history with him. Mr. Jack lowered his voice, as if telling a secret. Richard Thompson has always been a contradictory man, you know. On one hand, he had businesses that many people considered questionable. He lent money with high interest, took properties from those who couldn't pay. On the other hand, what? Well, he also helped a lot of needy families over the years, paid for the butcher John's daughter's surgery, gave jobs to a bunch of unemployed people, renovated the municipal school with his own money. Marcus was even more confused. So was he a good person or a bad person? I think he was human, son, like all of us. Did wrong things, but also did right things. The problem is that when you have money and influence, Your mistakes and successes affect a lot more people. And nowadays, how is he? Mr. Jack sighed. Nowadays, he's a lonely and bitter man. The wife he loved most in life left, taking the boy he considered a son. Since then, he's never been the same. The wife left, but why? That I don't really know. There were stories about complicated business dealings, but there were also people who said it was all a misunderstanding. You know how it is in a small town, right? People talk a lot and know little. Marcus returned home with even more questions than answers. When he told Rebecca about the conversation, she became thoughtful. Marcus, what if I was wrong about some things? And what if I ran away without giving him the chance to fully explain himself? Mum, are you sure about what you saw back then? I was sure, Marcus, but now, after so many years, I sometimes wonder if I interpreted the situations correctly. I was very young, raising you alone ever since your biological father left. Perhaps I was too scared to see things clearly. The afternoon of the meeting arrived quickly. Marcus and Rebecca headed to the office in the city centre, an elegant but not ostentatious building. The secretary received them politely and led them to a conference room. When Richard Thompson entered the room, Marcus recognized him immediately from the photographs, although the years had left visible marks. He was thinner, his hair completely grey, but his eyes still had the same intensity that Marcus had noticed in the old pictures. "Rebecca," said Richard, his voice choked with emotion. "You look exactly as I remembered." "Richard," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "What do you want from us after all these years?" Richard looked at Marcus, and a tear rolled down his face. "And you must be Marcus. My God, how you've grown. You look so much like me when I was your age." "I came here to understand what's going on," said Marcus, keeping a firm tone. "Why did you bring us back to this house? What are your intentions with our family?" Richard sat down heavily in a leather armchair. "Marcus, I never stopped looking for you. All these years I hired private investigators, combed through public records, followed any lead that might bring me to your mother and you." "For what?" asked Rebecca. "To ask for forgiveness. To explain things you never gave me the chance to explain when you left." Richard opened a folder that was on the table. "Rebecca, you left because you believed I was exploiting the families in our community, right?" "I didn't believe it, Richard. I saw it. I saw the abusive contracts. I saw the families being evicted. You saw part of the story, the part my partners wanted you to see." Richard took some documents out of the folder. "These are records I've kept all these years. Rebecca, I was being blackmailed by my own partners. They discovered some irregularities in the paperwork of my family inheritance and threatened me with losing everything if I didn't cooperate with their schemes." Rebecca took the papers with trembling hands. "I was trying to find a way to get rid of them without losing everything my father had built, but I needed time, and you left before I could resolve the situation. Why didn't you tell me this back then? Because I was afraid they would find out you knew and harm you, or harm Marcus. I preferred that you hated me rather than risk something happening to you." Marcus studied both of their expressions, trying to decipher the truth behind so much conflicting information. "And what happened after we left?" Richard sighed deeply. "It took me almost 3 years to completely free myself from those men. I had to sell several properties, lose a lot of money, but I finally managed to clean up my business. Since then, I've dedicated most of my time and resources to helping the families who were harmed during those years." "Are you saying you've completely changed?" "I'm saying I became the person I always wanted to be, but that circumstances didn't allow me to be back then. Marcus, do you want to know why I brought you back to that house?" Marcus nodded. "Because that house represents the happiest period of my life. The 2 years I spent raising you as my son, living with your mother, building a family. When you left, I couldn't live there anymore. But I also couldn't bring myself to get rid of it." Richard stood up and walked to the window. "All these years, I've kept the property in perfect condition, hoping that one day you'd come back. When my investigators finally located you in the neighboring town, I knew it was my only chance to have you back in my life." "So you planned everything?" asked Marcus. "The sale of the house, my financial situation?" "Marcus, I would never do anything to harm your family, But when I found out you were having financial difficulties, I may have created an opportunity for you to buy a house you could afford." Rebecca stared at him with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Richard, you manipulated my son. You made him sell all his belongings to give him the chance to become the strong man he has become." Richard raised his voice for the first time. "Rebecca, look at him. Marcus sacrificed everything for the family, worked hard, made tough decisions. He became exactly the kind of man I always dreamed he would be. That doesn't justify manipulating our situation." "You're right," Richard calmed down. "And that's why I'm here today, to make amends." Richard returned to the briefcase and took out more documents. "Marcus, besides that house where you're living, there are 5 other properties that technically still belong to the estate your mother and I built together. Properties she never claimed when she left." Marcus looked at his mother, confused. "What properties?" 2 rental houses downtown, a plot of land in the upscale neighborhood, and 2 commercial spots on Main Street. Calculated at current market value, they represent a considerable sum. Rebecca paled. "Richard, I renounced all that when I left. I don't want anything that comes from you." "But it's not mine, Rebecca. It's ours. It's Marcus's. It's the children's. It's the legacy of a family I destroyed because I didn't have the courage to face my problems back then." Richard approached Marcus. "Son, may I call you son?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I made many mistakes. I let you live in hardship when you could have had a comfortable life. But don't make the mistake of refusing something that could completely change Daniel and Emily's future." "What exactly are you proposing?" asked Marcus. "That you formally accept the inheritance of the properties, and that you allow me to be present in your lives again, not as a controlling patriarch, but as a grandfather to the children, as someone who wants to make up for lost time." Rebecca stood up abruptly. "Richard, I need to think about this. It's a lot to process all at once." "Of course, I understand completely. Just, please don't disappear again without giving me an answer." Marcus and Rebecca left the office in silence. The entire way back home, neither of them said a word. Each was lost in their own thoughts, trying to process the revelations and implications of everything they had discovered. When they arrived home, they found Daniel and Emily playing in the backyard, laughing loudly and seeming genuinely happy for the first time in a long while. The sight of the joyful children moved Rebecca. "Marcus, what if Richard is telling the truth? What if I really made a terrible mistake years ago?" "Mom, even if you made a mistake, you did what you thought was best at the time. What's important now is to decide what's best for our family today." "Do you think we should accept his offer?" Marcus watched his younger siblings playing. Daniel was teaching Emily how to kick an old soccer ball, and they both seemed genuinely happy. It was the first time in years he had seen them so carefree. "Mom, I think we should at least consider it. Not for us, but for them. Daniel and Emily deserve opportunities we never had. But what if Richard is lying about having changed? What if it's all just a more elaborate manipulation? Then we'll face that when it happens. But if he really has changed, if he truly wants to make amends for the past, maybe it's the chance for us to finally have the stability we've always dreamed of." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep again. He got up quietly and went to the backyard, where he sat in a plastic chair watching the stars. His mind was turbulent, full of doubts and possibilities. That's when he heard footsteps behind him. Rebecca had come out of the house and was approaching, carrying 2 cups of tea. "Can't sleep either?" "No. My head is too confused." They stayed silent for a few minutes, drinking the hot tea and watching the quiet night. "Marcus, can I tell you something I've never told you before?" "Of course, Mom." "I loved Richard. Very much. More than I've ever loved anyone else in my life. When I decided to leave, it wasn't just out of anger or disappointment. It was because my heart was completely broken." Marcus looked at his mother with surprise. She rarely spoke about romantic feelings. "Why did you never tell me this?" "Because I didn't want you to grow up idealizing a man I considered dangerous for our family. But now I wonder if I wasn't unfair to him." "And if we decide to give him a chance again? Could you handle that emotionally?" Rebecca sighed deeply. I don't know, Marcus, but I know I can no longer make decisions based only on fear or resentment. If there's a possibility that Richard has really changed, and if it can benefit our family, then I should at least try. And about the two of you? About you two, I mean. That's something only time will tell. First, we need to rebuild trust. Then, we'll see if there's still anything between us besides history and regret. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out, now continuing. The next day, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He left very early and went to Richard's office without prior notice. Marcus! What a pleasant surprise, said Richard, rising from his desk. Is something wrong? I want to ask a few questions, and I want you to answer with complete honesty. Of course, please have a seat. Marcus settled into the chair in front of Richard's desk. First, if we accept your proposals, what kind of control will you want to have over our lives? Richard thought carefully before answering. No control, Marcus. I want to be present. I want to be able to give advice when asked. I want to get to know Daniel and Emily. But you are adults. You have the right to live your lives as you see fit. Second question. If my mother decides she doesn't want to rekindle the relationship romantically, will you respect that decision? Absolutely. Marcus, I love your mother, but true love means wanting the person's happiness, whether or not that includes you. Third question. Are you sure you've really changed, that you won't get involved in questionable business again? Richard opened a desk drawer and took out an official document. 5 years ago, I filed a document with a notary publicly committing myself to ethical business practices. Furthermore, I created a foundation that monitors my business and has veto power over any transaction it considers dubious. Marcus studied the document. It seemed genuine and detailed. Why did you do this? Because I needed guarantees not just for you, but for myself. I needed to be sure I would never make the same mistakes of the past again. Last question. If we accept your proposals, do you promise you'll never manipulate our situations to force us into decisions again? Richard fell silent for a long moment. Marcus, I promise I will never do that again, and I apologize for doing it this time. It was wrong, and I understand if you can never fully forgive me for it. Marcus stood up from the chair. Thank you for the honest answers. Now I need to talk with my family. Marcus, wait. Can I ask a question? Of course. Can you see me as a father figure, or did what I do destroy any possibility of that? Marcus stopped at the door and turned. Mr. Richard, I grew up without a stable father figure. If you truly prove you've changed, if you treat our family with respect and care, I think it would be good to have a real father in my life. Richard began to cry openly. Thank you, son. Thank you so much. During the entire following week, the Johnson family exhaustively discussed the situation. Marcus shared his impressions from the conversation with Richard. Rebecca shared her fears and hopes, and even Daniel and Emily were included in the conversation in a way appropriate for their ages. Kids, there's a possibility our financial situation could improve a lot, explained Marcus, but it would involve meeting someone from our family's past. A good person or a bad person? Asked Emily, with the typical frankness of children. That's exactly the question we're trying to answer, said Rebecca. Daniel, always more observant, asked a question that surprised the adults. If our situation gets better, will I be able to invite my friends from school to come here without being embarrassed? Marcus felt his heart tighten. He hadn't realized how much the family's financial situation was affecting his younger brother's self-esteem. Daniel, you shouldn't be ashamed of our home or our family, regardless of whether we have money or not. I know that, Marcus, but it would be nice not to have to explain why we don't have some things that other families have. Daniel's observation made Rebecca realize that her own worries and traumas shouldn't prevent her children from having better opportunities. Marcus, I think we should accept Richard's proposal. Are you sure, Mom? No, I'm not sure of anything. But I'm sure I don't want Daniel and Emily to grow up carrying the consequences of my fears. At the end of the week, the family returned to Richard's office. This time all four of them were present. When Richard saw Daniel and Emily, his emotion was visible. He knelt down to be at the children's eye level. "You must be Daniel and Emily. I'm Richard, a very old friend of your family." "Are you rich?" asked Emily directly. Richard laughed, surprised by the frankness. "Well, I have more money than I need. But what would make me truly rich would be being able to be a part of your lives." Daniel, always more cautious, studied Richard silently before speaking. "Will you take care of our family?" "If you allow me, yes. I will do everything I can to take care of you." Rebecca stepped forward. "Richard, we've decided to accept your proposal, but with a few conditions." "What conditions?" "First, you cannot make decisions about our lives without consulting us first. Second, if at any point we feel you're falling back into old habits, we will walk away for good. Third, Marcus remains the primary head of the family. You will be an advisor and helper, not a replacement." "I accept all the conditions," said Richard, emotional. "And I have an additional condition," said Marcus. "What is it?" "I want to work with you. I want to learn your business, understand how all of this works. But I want to earn my place through hard work, not family favors." Richard smiled proudly. "Marcus, it would be an honor to have you working with me, and I promise you'll start at the bottom and have to prove your worth like any other employee." Perfect. The following months were a period of gradual adjustment for everyone. Richard kept his word not to try to control the family's decisions, but he was always available when they needed help or advice. Marcus started working at Richard's office as an administrative assistant, learning about property management and business in general. He discovered he had a natural aptitude for numbers and negotiation. Daniel and Emily slowly grew accustomed to having Richard around. He visited them twice a week, always bringing small gifts or offering to help with homework. Rebecca was the one who faced the greatest emotional challenge. Reconnecting with Richard brought to the surface many feelings she had buried years ago. One afternoon, while Richard was helping Emily with a school project on United States history, Rebecca watched him from the kitchen. He was patient and kind, explaining complex concepts in a way the girl could understand. "He really has changed," she murmured to herself. Marcus, who was studying work papers at the kitchen table, looked up. "Are you starting to trust him again?" "I think so. Slowly, but yes." "And romantically? Do you still feel anything for him?" Rebecca sighed. "Marcus, I never stopped loving Richard. I just buried that love very deep. Now, seeing the man he's become, it's hard not to remember why I fell in love with him in the first place." "But are you afraid of getting hurt again?" "I am. But I'm also afraid of wasting a second chance because of pride or fear." That night, after the children went to sleep, Rebecca surprised everyone, including herself, by inviting Richard for a walk around the town. They walked slowly through the quiet streets of the neighborhood, talking about changes that had occurred in the area over the years. "Richard, can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course, Rebecca." "All these years, did you never think about getting married again? Having other children?" Richard stopped walking and turned to her. "Rebecca, all these years, I measured myself against the memory I had of you. No other woman could measure up to what we felt together. It may have been naivety or stubbornness, but I could never get seriously involved with anyone else." "Wasn't that a very lonely life?" "It was. But I preferred the loneliness to a relationship without the depth we had." They continued walking until they reached a small square with a bench under a leafy tree. "Richard, I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I also could never get seriously involved with anyone else after we parted. All these years I always compared any man I met to you." Richard felt his heart speed up. "Does that mean—" "It means that maybe we have a chance to start over. Slowly, carefully, but start over." Richard took Rebecca's hand in his. "Rebecca, I promise this time will be different. I won't allow anything or anyone to put our family at risk again. And I promise that this time I will communicate my concerns instead of just running away when things get difficult." They kissed softly, a kiss that carried years of longing, regret, and renewed hope. When they returned home, they found Marcus waiting for them in the living room, smiling. "Looks like the talk was productive." "Marcus," said Rebecca, blushing slightly, "Richard and I have decided to give our relationship a second chance. I'm happy for you. But I hope this time they don't wait 20 years to solve problems when they arise." Richard laughed. "I promise that this time we'll face any difficulty together as a real family." The following months were the happiest the Johnson family had experienced in many years. With financial stability secured by the inherited properties, Marcus could dedicate himself fully to his business administration studies while continuing to work with Richard. Daniel flourished at school, managing to make new friends and participate in extracurricular activities he couldn't afford before. Emily discovered a talent for dance and was enrolled in lessons that Richard proudly offered to pay for. Rebecca and Richard rebuilt their relationship step by step, respecting the time needed for trust to be fully restored. One afternoon, 6 months after the reconciliation, Richard showed up at the house with an unexpected proposal. "Marcus, what do you think about expanding our business?" "How so?" "I've been thinking about opening a construction and renovation company specialized in affordable housing. Marcus, you've seen firsthand how hard it is for working families to get their own home. What if we could make that easier for other people?" Marcus was excited by the idea. "Would it be a way to help families like ours used to be, but also a sustainable business?" "Exactly. Moderate profit, but significant social impact. And you would be my main partner in the project." "Partner? But I've barely learned the basics of your current business." "Marcus, you've learned in 6 months what many employees take years to master. And more importantly, you understand the needs of the families we want to serve because you've lived that reality." Rebecca, who was listening to the conversation from the kitchen, approached. "Marcus, I think it's an amazing opportunity. And what an honor to the sacrifice you made selling everything to give us a home." Marcus was moved by his mother's words. "All right, let's try. But I want it to be a serious business, not a family favor." "It wouldn't be any other way," Richard assured. The construction company Johnson & Thompson Affordable Housing was founded 3 months later. Marcus, who had discovered a genuine passion for business, dedicated himself fully to the project. The first venture was a housing development of 15 simple but well-built homes intended for low-income families with facilitated financing. When Marcus saw the first family receiving the keys to their new home, he remembered the day he himself had signed the papers to purchase his property. The feeling of providing other families with the same joy he had felt was indescribable. "Richard," said Marcus as they watched the key handover ceremony, "thank you for giving me this opportunity." "Marcus, I should be thanking you. You gave me the chance to repair the mistakes of the past and to build something positive for the future." Rebecca approached the 2 most important men in her life. "Do you know what makes me proudest of all this?" "What?" they asked in unison. "It's that we're using our experience of hardship to help other people. Nothing we went through was in vain if we can turn it into something that benefits other families." Richard put his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "Rebecca, would you marry me? Officially this time." Marcus held his breath, waiting for his mother's answer. "Richard, I accept, but only if Marcus is the one to walk me down the aisle." "Mom," said Marcus, emotional, "it would be the greatest honor of my life." The wedding was held 6 months later, in a simple but very moving ceremony. Daniel was the page boy, and Emily, the flower girl. The party was held in the backyard of the house where everything had started over, the very same property that had been the stage for so much suffering, and was now a symbol of renewal. During the party, Marcus made a toast that moved everyone present. 2 years ago, I sold everything I had to buy a house for my family. I thought I was making the biggest sacrifice of my life. Today, I realize I was actually taking the first step toward finding our true happiness." He raised his glass. "To the sacrifice that turns into a blessing, to the secrets that reveal themselves as gifts, and to the families that rebuild themselves with love, patience, and forgiveness." Richard, visibly moved, stood up. "Marcus, you have become the man any father would be proud to call a son. Rebecca, you are proof that some love stories deserve second chances. Daniel and Emily, you are the future of this family, and I promise to do everything to ensure you have all the opportunities you deserve. Rebecca also wanted to speak. For years I have lived in fear that the past could hurt my family. Today I understand that the past, when faced with courage and love, can be the foundation for building an even better future. The party continued late into the night, with music, dancing, and much joy. The neighbors who had initially looked with suspicion upon the family's return to that house were now celebrating with them. Mr. Jack, the fruit vendor who had given Marcus information about Richard months before, approached the young man during the party. "Marcus, do you remember our conversation at the market?" "Of course, Mr. Jack. You told me Richard was a contradictory man." "That's right. Today I see that perhaps he wasn't contradictory. Perhaps he was just human, trying to do the best he knew how under the circumstances he had." Marcus reflected on the older man's words. "You're right. Perhaps we are all a little contradictory. The important thing is to keep trying to be better every day." Dear listener, if you are enjoying the story, please take a moment to leave a like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we are just starting out. Now continuing. 2 years after the wedding, the company Johnson & Thompson had become a regional reference for quality affordable housing. Marcus, now 30, had become a respected businessman known for his ethics and social commitment. Richard, at 62, had discovered in late fatherhood a source of energy and purpose he had never imagined possible. He and Rebecca had found a perfect balance between the passion they had always felt for each other and the maturity gained over the years of separation. Daniel, now 12, had become one of the best students in his school and showed interest in the family business. Emily, at 10, continued to excel in dance and had won several regional competitions. One Sunday afternoon, while the whole family was gathered in the backyard of the house that had been the catalyst for all these changes, Rebecca made an announcement that surprised everyone. "Family, Richard and I have some news to share." Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to her. "We're going to have a baby." The initial silence was broken by the children's shouts of joy and an emotional hug from Marcus to his mother and stepfather. "Mom, that's wonderful," said Marcus. "Am I going to have another little brother?" asked Emily excitedly. "Or little sister," corrected Daniel, smiling. Richard was so emotional he could barely speak. "Marcus, do you know what this means?" "What, Richard?" "It means our family will have a child who will grow up knowing only love, stability, and togetherness. A child who will never know the version of me that caused so many problems in the past." Rebecca moved closer to Richard. "This child will grow up with 4 older siblings who will protect and love them unconditionally." "4?" asked Marcus, confused. "Marcus, you, Daniel, Emily, and our baby on the way. They are all my children. They are all Richard's children. We are a big, united and strong family." Rebecca's pregnancy brought even more joy and unity to the family. Marcus took on even more responsibilities in the business, allowing Richard to be more present during this special time. During the months of waiting, something happened that no one had foreseen. A journalistic investigation revealed that several businessmen in the region had been victims of blackmail by the same group that had pressured Richard years before. The report showed how this group had operated for decades, forcing honest businessmen to participate in questionable schemes through threats and manipulation. Richard was approached by the journalists to give his testimony. "Mr. Richard, could you confirm if you were a victim of this group?" "I can confirm. For nearly 3 years, I was forced to make decisions that went against my principles because they threatened to destroy everything my family had built." "And what finally motivated you to resist them?" Richard looked at Marcus, who was by his side during the interview. "What motivated me was realizing I was losing my family because of fear. I discovered it was better to lose material possessions than to lose the people I loved. How did you manage to get rid of them?" "With a lot of patience, strategy, and specialized legal help. It took years, but I managed to gather enough evidence to expose them and free myself from the blackmail." The report had a major impact in the region. Many people who had judged Richard for his questionable past business dealings now understood that he too had been a victim. Marcus felt proud seeing his stepfather publicly recognized as someone who had had the courage to face criminals, to protect his family, and restore his integrity. When the baby was born, it was a girl named Hope. The name was chosen together by the family as it represented exactly what she symbolized: a new hope, a new beginning, the consolidation of a family that had overcome all obstacles. Marcus, holding his newborn baby sister, reflected deeply on the journey they had taken. "Richard, do you remember the day I found that box in the attic?" "How could I forget? You were so angry with me. Back then I thought you had destroyed our family. Today I understand that you had actually created the conditions for it to be rebuilt even stronger." Richard, holding Rebecca's hand as she rested in the hospital bed, reflected on Marcus's words. "Son, sometimes the worst moments of our lives are necessary for us to reach the best moments." "Richard is right," said Rebecca. "If I hadn't left with you all those years ago, maybe I never would have learned to value what truly matters. If Marcus hadn't sold everything to buy that house, maybe we never would have discovered that our happiness was waiting to be reclaimed." Daniel, who had matured a lot throughout this whole process, made an observation surprising for his age. "So does that mean sometimes bad things happen so that good things can happen afterward?" "That's an interesting way of looking at things," said Marcus. "But I think the most important thing is that when bad things happen, we choose how we're going to react to them." Emily, always practical, made her own observation. "I think the important thing is that now we are a happy family and that Hope will grow up being very loved." During the following months, Hope's arrival brought a completely new dynamic to the family. Marcus discovered that being an older brother to a baby was a different responsibility from caring for Daniel and Emily. Richard, experiencing fatherhood at 63, proved to be an even more present and affectionate father than he had been with Marcus as a child. Rebecca, now 46 with the wisdom that comes from experience, was raising Hope with a serenity and confidence she hadn't had when she was a first-time mother. The Johnson & Thompson Company continued to grow, always maintaining its focus on quality, affordable housing. Marcus had become a sought-after speaker at social entrepreneurship events, telling the story of how he had turned a personal sacrifice into a business opportunity that benefited hundreds of families. At one of these talks, he always ended with a reflection that became his trademark. "Sometimes when we sell everything we have to give something better to our family, we discover that we are actually buying much more than we imagined. We are buying the opportunity to discover who we really are, what we are capable of, and how strong the love can be between people who care for each other." During one of these talks, Marcus was approached by a young woman from the audience. "Mr. Marcus, I really identify with your story. My family is also going through financial difficulties, and I'm thinking of selling my car to get a down payment for a house. Do you think it's a good idea?" Marcus smiled, remembering himself a few years earlier. "Can I ask you a few questions first?" "Of course." "Are you doing this out of love for your family or out of desperation?" The young woman thought carefully before answering. "Out of love. I want my children to have a stable place to grow up." "Second question, are you prepared for the consequences, both positive and negative, of this decision?" "I think so. I know it will be difficult at first, but I believe it's worth it." Last question, are you sure you're making this decision with your family's support, or are you deciding alone? "With my family's support. We've talked a lot about it." Marcus nodded, satisfied with the answers. "Then I would say you should follow your heart. But remember, the sacrifice is only the first step. The most important thing is what you do after it." "What do you mean?" "I mean that selling everything to buy a house was just the beginning of my story. What really changed our lives was everything we discovered and built after that." The young woman thanked him for the advice and left with a determined yet hopeful expression. Richard, who had watched the conversation, approached Marcus. "You've become very wise, son." "I learned from my mistakes and from yours, Richard, and I mainly learned that sometimes the best things in life come disguised as problems." 5 years had passed since the day Marcus had discovered the box in the attic. The Johnson-Thompson family was now one of the most respected in the region, known both for business success and for social work. Marcus, at 33, had married Sarah, an architect he had met during a company project. They lived in a simple but comfortable house next to the original property. maintaining the family closeness that had always been important to them. Daniel, at 15, was already working part-time at the company during school vacations, learning the business from an early age. He showed a natural aptitude for leadership and a genuine concern for social issues. Emily, at 13, had won a scholarship to a dance school in the state capital, but chose to continue living with the family and commute daily. His dedication and talent were recognized regionally. Hope, now 3 years old, was a cheerful and bright child who had brought even more light to a family already overflowing with happiness. One Sunday afternoon, while the whole family was gathered for the traditional weekly lunch, Rebecca made an observation that perfectly summarized the journey they had traveled. "You know something? If someone had told me 10 years ago that we would all be here in this house, happy and prosperous, I would never have believed it." "Why not, Mom?" asked Emily. "Because back then I could only see the problems, the difficulties, the reasons to be afraid. I couldn't see the possibilities for happiness that were right in front of us." Marcus stood up and walked to the window overlooking the backyard, where everything had begun to change. "Mom, I think sometimes we need to go through moments of darkness to truly appreciate the light when it finally arrives." Richard, holding Hope in his arms, added, "And sometimes we need to have the courage to confront our fears and past mistakes to be able to build a better future." Sarah, who had become an integral part of the family since her marriage to Marcus, watched the scene with emotion. "It's beautiful to see a family that managed to turn so much suffering into so much joy. And the most beautiful part," said Daniel, "is that now we can help other families make the same transformation." The company Johnson & Thompson had built over 200 affordable homes in the region, providing decent housing for hundreds of families. But beyond that, it had become a model for how a business can be profitable and socially responsible at the same time. Marcus also created a mentorship program for young, low-income entrepreneurs, teaching principles of management and business ethics. Many of his mentees had opened their own businesses, creating a positive cycle of economic and social development in the region. Richard, even at nearly 70 years old, remained active in the business, but had passed most of the executive responsibilities to Marcus. He dedicated much of his time to the foundation he had created to monitor business ethics practices. One afternoon, while Marcus and Richard were working together in the office, news arrived that moved them deeply. The company had been selected to receive a national award for corporate social responsibility. "Marcus, do you realize what this means? That our work is being recognized nationally? More than that, it means the decision you made 5 years ago, selling everything to buy a house, had an impact that neither you nor I ever imagined possible." Marcus reflected on Richard's words. "You know, Richard, sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't found that box in the attic. What do you think would have happened? Maybe we would have continued living as an ordinary family, never discovering our true potential, never learning that love can overcome any difficulty when faced with courage and honesty. And would you regret that?" Marcus smiled. "Never, because even if we had remained an ordinary family, we would still be a family that loves each other, and that is already more than many people have in life." Richard stood up and walked to a framed photograph on the office wall. It was the photo Marcus had found in the box years ago, showing the young, happy family in the same house where they now lived. "Marcus, can I tell you a secret?" "Of course." "I never got rid of this house because I always knew, deep in my heart, that you would all return to it one day." "How could you be so sure?" "Because this house was built with love, and things built with true love have a way of drawing back the people who belong to it." Marcus joined Richard before the photograph. "Do you think Hope will like knowing this story when she grows up? I think she'll be proud to be part of a family that didn't give up on love, even when it seemed lost forever." That night, during dinner, Marcus decided to share the news of the award with the whole family. "Everyone, we have something to celebrate. Our company won a national award." The children erupted in applause and shouts of joy. "Does that mean we're famous?" asked Hope, with her 3 years of age. "No, little one," said Rebecca, laughing. "It means the work of your dad Richard and your brother Marcus is helping a lot of people, and other people are seeing that." Daniel, always mature for his age, made a perceptive observation. Does it mean our story can inspire other families not to give up when things get tough? Exactly, said Marcus. And do you know what the most beautiful part of all this is? What? Asked the children in chorus. It's that our story isn't over yet. We still have so much love to give, so much to build, so much to learn from each other. Rebecca stood up and hugged Richard. Richard, thank you for waiting for us all these years. Rebecca, thank you for giving me a second chance to be the man I always wanted to be. Marcus looked at the family gathered around the kitchen table of the house that had completely changed their lives. You know something? If I had to sell everything again to have all this we have today, I'd sell it 1,000 times. Why? Asked Emily. Because I discovered that when you give everything for love, you get so much more back than you ever imagined possible. Marcus's words echoed through the kitchen, filled with emotion and truth. The family that had begun the story fragmented by the secrets and fears of the past was now united by transparency, forgiveness, and a love that had been tested and proven unbreakable. Richard looked at each face around the table, his beloved wife, the son he raised as his own, the stepchildren who accepted him as a father, the daughter who represented the renewal of his life. Marcus is right, he said. When we sell everything for love, we discover that love is the only thing that's really worth anything in this life. Rebecca wiped the tears of joy streaming down her face. And when we have the courage to face our fears and mistakes from the past, we discover they can become the foundation for building a future better than we ever dreamed. Little Hope, even without fully understanding the adult's words, felt the energy of love that filled the kitchen. She clapped her hands joyfully, drawing smiles from everyone. Daniel and Emily exchanged glances, understanding they were part of something special, a family that had weathered storms and had chosen to become stronger through them. Marcus got up from the table and walked to the window, looking out at the backyard where the children used to play, where Richard had proposed to Rebecca again, where so many important moments had happened. Do you know the biggest lesson I learned from all this? Everyone turned to him, awaiting his words. I learned that sometimes the hardest decisions we make in life are exactly the ones we need to make to discover who we really are and what we're capable of. Richard joined Marcus at the window, and I learned that it's never too late to become the person you always wanted to be if you have the courage to make the right choices. Rebecca approached the two most important men in her life. And I learned that true love isn't the kind that never faces difficulties, but the kind that chooses to fight through the difficulties to become even stronger. The family remained there, gathered in the kitchen of the house that had been the turning point in their lives, knowing they had built something precious and lasting. Marcus looked at the clock on the wall and realized it was almost time to put the children to bed. Hope, let's go brush our teeth. I want Daddy Richard to tell me a story. What story do you want to hear? Asked Richard, picking up the little girl. The story of our family. Richard smiled, looking at Marcus and Rebecca. It's a very beautiful story, little one. It's about a brave boy who sold everything he had to give a house to his family, and about how that act of love changed the lives of everyone he loved. And does it have a happy ending? Yes, it does. But the most beautiful part is that it's not really an ending. It's actually a new beginning for many happy stories that are still to come. While Richard took Hope to the bedroom, Marcus and Rebecca stayed in the kitchen, finishing clearing the table. Mom, can I ask you a question? Of course, son. Are you truly happy? Completely happy? Rebecca stopped what she was doing and looked deeply into her son's eyes. Marcus, for a long time, I thought happiness was having no problems. Today I understand that happiness is having people with whom you can face any problem. And is that what we have? That is what we have. A family that chooses to stay together, that chooses to support each other, that chooses to grow together through any difficulty. Marcus hugged his mother for a long time. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for what? For teaching me that sometimes running away is necessary to survive, but that you also need to have the courage to come back when it's time to build something better. Rebecca was moved by her son's words. And thank you, Marcus, for showing me that a son's love can be strong enough to bring an entire family back together. That night, after everyone had gone to sleep, Marcus stayed awake for a few more minutes, sitting on the porch of the house, watching the stars in the clear country sky. He thought of the desperate young man he had been 2 years before, selling everything he owned in a desperate attempt to improve his family's life. Now he understood that that moment had been only the first step of a much larger journey. His reflections were interrupted by the arrival of Richard, who also couldn't sleep. "May I join you?" "Of course, Richard, sit down." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, each lost in their own thoughts. "Marcus, can I tell you something I've never told anyone?" "Go ahead." "During all the years you were away, I used to come here at night and sit on this same porch, imagining what it would be like if I could have my family back." "And how did you imagine it would be?" "I imagined conversations like this one, simple moments of peace and contentment, knowing the people I love are safe and happy." Marcus smiled in the dark. "And how is it in reality, compared to what you imagined?" "It's 1,000 times better because it's real. Because I know that tomorrow when I wake up, you'll still be here. Because I know we've built something solid, based on truth and genuine love." "Richard, can I make a confession to you?" "Of course. For a long time I was angry at you, even after I understood the whole situation. Not for the blackmail you suffered, but for letting our family go through so many unnecessary hardships." Richard stayed silent, waiting for the rest of the confession. "But now I understand that if we had had an easy life from the start, maybe we would never have learned to truly value each other. Maybe we would never have developed the strength and determination that brought us here." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. Because I see how hope is growing, surrounded by love and security. But I also see how Daniel and Emily have a maturity and empathy that only come from having gone through hardships." Richard placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Marcus, you've become a better man than I ever was. A better father, a better leader, a better person. I could only become this because I had you as an example of what to do and what not to do." They laughed together, a laugh filled with complicity and paternal affection. "Richard, can I call you my real father now?" Richard began to cry openly. "Marcus, nothing in this world would honor me more." "Then thank you, Dad, for fighting to come back to our family, for teaching me that it's possible to change when we really want to, for giving me the opportunity to help other families through our company. Thank you, son, for having the courage to sacrifice everything for family, for giving me a second chance, for becoming the man I always believed you could be." They hugged there on the porch under the stars, sealing a paternal relationship that had begun when Marcus was a baby, had been interrupted by years of separation, and was now being renewed with the maturity and wisdom both had acquired. When they finally got up to go to sleep, Marcus had one last reflection. "Dad, do you know what the most amazing thing about this whole story is?" "What is it?" "It's that it started with me selling everything to buy a house and ended with us building a home that goes beyond any physical property. A home made of love, forgiveness, growth, and hope. Marcus, our story isn't over. It's just beginning." "You're right, and I can't wait to see what the future holds for our family." They entered the house quietly, so as not to wake the rest of the family. But before parting ways to go to their respective rooms, Richard said one last thing. "Marcus, tomorrow we'll start planning our next company expansion. I thought about creating a student funding program for young people from low-income families." "That's an excellent idea, Dad. But for now, let's rest. Tomorrow we plan how to keep changing the world one family at a time." And so in the quiet of the early morning, in the house that had been the starting point for so many discoveries and transformations, the Johnson-Thompson family slept in peace, knowing they had built something beautiful and lasting through love, determination, and faith in the possibility of starting over. The house that Marcus had bought by selling everything he owned had become much more than a property. It had become the symbol that sometimes you have to lose everything to discover that what truly matters has always been within us. Our capacity to love, to forgive, to fight for those we consider family, and to build something beautiful even when we start with almost nothing. And as they slept, little Hope smiled in her dreams, growing up in a home built on the solid foundation of true love, surrounded by a family that had learned that life's greatest treasures are not those we buy, but those we build with our own hands and hearts. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Marcus made the right decision by selling everything for his family? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.